Going to school every morning, spending your day together with other kids in classrooms. None of this can be taken for granted anymore. Education in times of the pandemic, our topic today. Welcome to DW's COVID-19 special on this Good Friday, a public holiday in many parts of the world. But soon the struggle starts again, trying to keep up with the curriculum despite lockdown.
Every morning, the Villarroel family has to decide which of their 4 children gets to do online schooling that day. The family in the Bolivian capital, La Paz, only has one smartphone, just like many other families in the country. Then there are also problems with the internet connection. There are so many different apps, Classroom, Zoom, and so on. And most of them only work with a high-end phone and decent internet. When I go to work at 10 a.m., there's only one suitable phone left here. And so 3 children are left with nothing. The platform for virtual school lessons was set up by the Bolivian Education Ministry. The government insists the system has been set up in a way that ensures everyone can access the online classes. We set up a timetable that regulates who can use the platform when. Each day is allocated for a different school grade, so it's not like all the children have to use it every day. But obviously the system still needs further optimization. Using the school platform is free of charge, but accessing the internet is very expensive in Bolivia. A problem that Cristian Leon has long been urging the government to address. He set up an advocacy group to draw attention to the problem.
Bolivia
only got fiber optic internet in 2018. The network does now cover most of the country, but most households still aren't connected to it. Bolivia's national telecommunications company states that 1 gigabyte of data costs $5, a price not every family can afford, says Viviana Kumara. Only those with more money can afford internet access, so education is no longer free in Bolivia, because right now the more money you have, the more you can learn. The Education Ministry has promised to provide 30,000 computers to at least improve the hardware problem, but that won't be enough for all. Many families, like the Villarroels, will have to continue finding their own solutions to ensure their children can take part in online schooling, until the vaccine rollout advances enough for children to return to the classroom.
Should schools remain open, or should they be closed to stop the spread of the virus? Let's bring in Jonathan Suk, a principal expert in emergency preparedness at the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control in Stockholm. Good to have you with us. And I know that you conducted a study into COVID-19 in schools. When it comes to keeping schools open or not, what are your findings?
Thank you very much for having us. First of all, we're constantly updating the literature, and we're reviewing the studies on this. We're finding that, of course, any what we call non-pharmaceutical interventions, if you close something in society, that leads to less social mixing. So it will have an impact on the overall transmission of SARS-CoV-2. So it's potentially important to measure. What we're seeing and what the most recent literature shows is that on the second wave and more recent closures of schools have less of an impact than they did in the first wave. And this has to do with schools have adapted in the way that they've been practicing. They're not operating as they did in pre-pandemic levels, but they're doing more measures internally to keep them safe, to keep students safe, to try to keep teachers safe. And those measures have an impact. And so we think that it may be necessary to close schools. There's no question about that with the new variant circulating. But the general consensus that WHO, UNICEF, ECDC have relates to trying to keep schools open and closing them only as a last resort.
All
This
right.
means, first of all, working.
Could you define that last? I mean, who or what determines what this last resort would be?
That has to be decision makers in the local context to understand the transmission levels, understand the burden on the healthcare system of the current levels of ICU and so on, and who really can do a proper assessment of what measures are in place in schools, if everything has been tried within the schools to really keep transmission down or not, and then what sorts of levels of schools. Let's also not make it a binary thing. Schools do not need to be just fully open or fully closed. There are hybrid models. There are different age groups that are important to consider. So it's not just a whole either-or situation in most cases either.
There are a lot of options there for authority makers. Doesn't necessarily make it more easy to come to the right conclusion. Do we actually know where children catch the virus in the first place? Is that happening at school? Do they get it from teachers, from other children? Or do they bring the virus into the school because they catch it at home?
That's a fantastic question, and we've been trying to understand that better. In terms of the school settings themselves, what we've actually found is that there are very few documented instances where you see large outbreaks in school settings. So transmission certainly happens in schools, but the literature from many different countries in Europe and globally suggests that there's not necessarily the need for lots of outbreaks in school settings. What we wonder and what we need to learn more about, of course, are what happens to children, not just in the school itself, but after school, extracurricular activities, on the way to school, on the way home from school. And of course, as you mentioned, in household settings, there's also the possibility for transmission. So we don't have precise numbers on that, but the information on schools is that they can actually be operated safely without too many instances of large outbreaks.
I mean, in these still quite trying and very confusing times, a lot of parents feel safer having their kids around. And in some countries where schools reopened, decided to not send their kids back to school because they don't trust the situation. Do they have a point?
It's really hard to assess that without knowing the specific details of the context in which they have made those decisions. I certainly understand why people are worried. There's a lot of research also from Germany, a large study just from Scotland recently that shows, at least for the parents of younger children, there does not appear to be an increased risk to the parents catching the virus from their children, even at periods when they've been sent back to school. We also know that by and large, the number of severe outcomes in children is very, very low. We're not seeing any change in that even with the new variants. We've been following very closely data, millions of cases, and children, particularly younger children, follow this the age gradient. So we know that elderly continue to be the most risk, followed by older adults, but children really have very, very rare instances of severe outcomes, such as hospitalization or death.
Right, but we do know that children can carry and they can spread the virus. So what do you make of the concept of homeschooling? Wouldn't that, in this moment in time, make most sense?
Yeah, it's true that children can transmit the virus. As I mentioned, it appears to be the case that they transmit it somewhat less than adults do, and they appear also to be less susceptible to the virus than adults do. I'm by no means an expert in education and homeschooling, but what we've understood from the vast amount of literature that exists, that it is very difficult for children to be home. And we understand as well that there is a gradient. So the learning loss from children is less in children from well-off backgrounds, but from deprived backgrounds, vulnerable backgrounds, this can be really detrimental to the education and even the health and well-being of children. So all of these things have to be taken into account. There's no easy answer, I fully appreciate that, but these are the things that decision makers do need to consider.
Indeed, a lot of food for thought there for decision makers. Jonathan Suk from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control in Stockholm. Thank you so much for your time. Happy Easter.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, and time for your questions now. Over to Derek.
How long can vaccine side effects last? Does discomfort indicate it's working?
I want to leave all the speculation about blood clotting and the AstraZeneca vaccine behind for a minute and focus on what we know for certain about common minor side effects reported in connection with COVID vaccines. Pretty much all of the ones approved so far in various parts of the world appear to be pretty reactogenic, which means they regularly cause mild side effects like pain and swelling at the injection site, as well as things like fatigue, headache, fever, chills, or aching joints. The single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine appears to cause those effects somewhat less often. In two-dose mRNA vaccines, they seem to occur more commonly after the second dose, while the opposite seems to hold true for the AstraZeneca vaccine. Another point worth mentioning is that younger people seem to react more often and more powerfully than the elderly. It's thought that's because they have more responsive immune systems. Authorities say the symptoms can last a few days, but in most of the first-hand reports that I read, they subsided within 36 hours. The good news is that side effects, while unpleasant, are actually a sign that the vaccine is doing what it's supposed to do, which is laying the groundwork for an immune response, so that if you are infected with the virus, your body can get to work straight away wiping it out. Personally, I'm more than happy to experience a day or two of discomfort if I know that I'll be protected afterwards from a potentially life-threatening case of COVID-19. That sounds like a really great deal to me.
And finally, as shopping malls are closed amid pandemic lockdowns, a school in the US state of Vermont decided to make use of the empty space. Students can now take lessons in this former Macy's mall. Why not? Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.